Okay. Wow, we're live. Good
Awesome.
morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome, everybody, to the Art of Health and Wellbeing. It's a Unicorn Fart production. I'm very, very excited to have our first guest today, Amelia, all the way from Canada. She's an artist and art therapist. As a pharmacist from Australia, I'm really excited to speak to her and learn about this world of art and creativity and how can an art therapist help our patients in the community, as well as from a patient point of view, client point of view, how can I become better through art therapy? I'm just dying to know. So welcome, Amelia, to join our show.
Thank you so much, Allie. Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm just really excited. So before we start, we'll get to know you. So just in a very brief 2 sentences, what is art therapy?
It's almost hard to put into words, but really simply speaking, art therapy is a modality that combines elements of psychotherapy, counseling, and then actual creative art, so art making. And it's a little bit different from talk therapy in that instead of going into the office of a therapist or a counselor, you're coming into an art studio and you're able to engage both in dialogue and in art making to make sense of your experience.
Mm. So who benefits from art therapy? Who are your clients normally?
Yeah, so I mean that's another kind of wide ranging question. I think anybody can. I know I've personally worked with people from the age of 5 to the age of 90. So there's no kind of age limit. I know we kind of associate creativity with a certain age level, or think maybe that art therapy would be something for kids, but I really think that people of all ages can benefit from having time and setting aside some space to kind of access their internal creativity. I think it's also important to mention that art therapy isn't just for people who are, quote unquote artists. It's really for people who have maybe a lot of experience and are very, very comfortable in art making. Maybe they identify as artists, or that's how they make their money. But it's also for people who have never touched a paintbrush. I have clients come in all the time and say, "Oh, I can't even draw a stick figure." And I really like to reassure people, like, yep, that's okay. You don't need to kind of feel like you have a lot of experience, because what we're doing in art therapy is so much about the process of making art and how that feels and the kind of information we get from the act of making as opposed to the final product. And we're very taught in our culture and in school that the only value that art has is if it meets a certain kind of criteria once it's finished. But as a practitioner, as a therapist, I am much more interested in kind of what the whole experience is like for my clients and what they're learning kind of as they're having a tactile experience of the materials, what kinds of things are surprising them in the process.
Wow,
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting. Yeah, we're so into, the final product. It has to look pretty and beautiful and colorful. And I was actually going to ask, what about people who never learnt art, or they feel that they wanted to express themselves, but don't know how to. I think that would be perfect, through art therapy to get them to express themselves. So you are an interdisciplinary artist. What does that mean?
Right. So that means I work across mediums. And that's just because I like to dabble and I have kind of a short attention span for art making. I like to kind of have my hand in a bunch of different things at once. But it means that I work with all sorts of materials, everything from paint to clay to embroidery to collage. I really like to kind of keep a wide range in my own personal practice so that when I kind of have clients in my studio space, that we have the option to work with all sorts of different things. So art therapy sometimes is painting, but sometimes it's taking a ball of Play-Doh and kneading it for an hour or 2 hours. It's all kinds of materials.
Wow, it's so interesting. How long have you been an artist? You're an artist as well as an art therapist. How did you
Mm-hmm.
get into the world of art?
Well, I think it's a great privilege to have parents who are really supportive. I've been, I guess, an artist my entire life. I was very, very encouraged from a young age to paint. And worked with an abstract painter from the time I was 5 years old up until I was a teenager. And then from there went on to study fine art at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. So I kind of come from a more fine art background approaching art therapy. And my own personal art practice is very dear and sacred to me. So I've been kind of painting and using different materials my entire life to make sense of my experience and connect with myself.
Wow, I certainly can see that on your Instagram, page, and it's amazing. All the color, it's beautiful, and I'm just really drawn to it and really interested. So I will get to my question later. So how can I get into that? So how did you transition from an artist to become an art therapist? What is it, a big transition, or what's the difference?
Yeah, so I mean, there's kind of two parts to that question. How did I transition? I think I always knew that art therapy was the direction I wanted to head in. I knew that going through art school. I wasn't very competitive. I didn't want to try and move to New York and pursue painting in that way. I didn't want to try and make a living from my art. I did know that I wanted my creative practice to be in the context of community. And that's something I really got in my undergraduate degree, was this study of community arts. MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art, has this incredible community arts program where they connect students with different community agencies. I actually was working in a prison and a rehab center and using art as a way of having conversations about social justice, gathering in community. So, for me, I think art has always been this incredible connective tool to have conversations about what we need to feel well as human beings. So that was always the plan. So I got my BFA and then went on to study art therapy in graduate school. So that's a different process. And that's where I kind of started to learn the clinical skills and got some of the counseling and the psychotherapy pieces to add to my practice and actually be able to take on clients and hold the creative space, but also hold the mental health space.
Wow.
So through the process of doing art therapy training, I was lucky again to go to a really amazing school, the Kootenai Art Therapy Institute in Nelson, British Columbia. And so their program is really robust. They have you do a practicum about 350 hours, and you get to try out lots of different sites. So in the 2 years that I studied there, I was able to work in schools. I was able to work in transitional housing, in retirement homes, take on individual clients. And that's where I really started to do more work around grief and loss with art therapy. And that's some of my big heart work is using art as a tool for kind of holding the losses that we all face in our lives.
Wow. I think it's so, so important, especially from 2020 COVID-19 and also this year, we're still seeing the impact from this huge pandemic, and grief and trauma is mental health in general is a huge topic amongst the healthcare professional as well as everyday lives. So share with us, you mentioned that your painting, you use painting in bodily practice, hold space. You went through that grief and trauma yourself. Can you share with us, if that's okay, share with us your journey of overcoming this grief and trauma, or this process using art?
Yeah, I think no one comes into this work accidentally, right? Like, we all know people who are in the field of social work or different kinds of therapeutic modalities, and there's usually a story of direct experience there. And I experienced, a big loss and trauma very early in my childhood. And, one of the big privileges of my life was, I think, being connected with access to art really early on. I actually worked with an abstract painter, that same woman I mentioned before. And, I think having the tools from a very young age to communicate and explore my experience in a way that wasn't verbal was really valuable for me, right? Because developmentally, as a child, you might not have the language or the cognitive capacity to make sense of something like grief or trauma or things that are above a 5-year-old's understanding. So I think for me, at least, I know that having had different types of color and texture and shape just gave me one more way of making sense of my experience. And I carried that kind of through my adolescence and into my adulthood, this kind of extended, I guess, capacity to understand myself. And that's the work I want to be doing in the world. I want to be kind of creating situations where people can come into a studio space, whether it's digital or in person, and they have the time and the compassion of someone who is able to hold the space for them to really make sense of their experience with some creative tools.
Wow, I am so excited and really interested. So you said you use digital platforms, you work with clients online. Now, I'm in Australia, so if people across the world want to work with you, can you walk us through the journey, how you take your clients through?
Well, I'm so glad you asked about working digitally. And this is a big thing I'm really interested in because the pandemic. I graduated from my program a year ago thinking I was going to be able to go and work in person with people, and was kind of thrown into the world of therapy. But when it's, we're not actually able to meet with each other in person. So I have been working completely digitally for, about a year now. And it's been amazing. This is something that's really surprising me. I was worried at the beginning that it wouldn't actually work because art and art therapy is so tactile. It's so much about, the materials you're using. In a perfect world, I could have a studio space where I invite clients in to actually, use the materials I provide for them. I could put giant paper up on the wall, right? Like it's a very physical experience. So the question of like, how do we do that in Zoom or online has been a big one for me. And it's actually what I kind of wrote my graduate research on, is how do we do this online? But so to walk you through what a session will look like. So what will generally happen is I'll do an intake session or kind of a consult with a client, kind of see if their goals are aligned with art therapy, see, how art can serve whatever goals they have. I, ask the question very often, how do you want to feel, 2 months from now or 3 months from now? And what can we do with, art to kind of help you to get to that place? And from there, the client is kind of then responsible for creating their own at-home studio. And so they can choose whatever materials they want. It can be paint, pencil, crayons, anything they like. It can also just be found materials. I'm a big fan of kind of grabbing objects from around your home and making a sculpture, kind of dumping out the laundry basket and turning it into something. I love to see people use recycled materials or things that they just have access to at home. So then, I'll give maybe a prompt or an invitation based on kind of whatever themes we're working with. And the client will take some time, either before session or during the session, to make something. Wow. And, either they, make it right then and there, or they've come in and having already done the process. And then from there we process, which is where we kind of put the art up and take a step back and start to look at what happened and talk about, first of all, what the process was like, what they're seeing now, any kind of metaphors or symbols or meaning. And we kind of come into dialogue with the artwork. And from there, a lot of insight is possible. I think one of the big differences between art therapy and talk therapy is the capacity for surprise, right? Because generally, when you're in talk therapy with someone, you kind of know everything, you're conscious of everything that you're saying, right? And this isn't to knock talk therapy. I am a huge fan of talk therapy and do talk therapy myself. But something that happens in art is you'll be in the flow of a process, you'll be making something, then you'll step back and you'll say, whoa, I didn't notice that. And you'll start to be surprised by some of the content that comes up in your art. Maybe it's bringing back a memory you'd forgotten, or there's a symbol in there that is actually connecting to something that you wanted to kind of sort out. So the art can really reveal a lot to us in a surprising way.
Wow, it is. Wow, I can see that now. How, it's like two-part. One is to get clients to express themselves in any way. There's no boundaries. And I think you're so right. And when we are talk therapy, language itself is boundary itself. So art therapy, you're really using art, you can do anything. And then you unpack and then you talk about the deeper emotions. Wow, amazing.
Yeah, and talk therapy, for some people, it doesn't feel really comfortable to sit in conversation, to make eye contact with someone. Maybe someone experiences neurodivergence. Maybe, just conversations haven't been positive experiences for them in the past. Maybe it's tough to develop trust with strangers. There's all sorts of reasons that a person might not feel super comfortable having a conversation about vulnerable stuff with with a fairly new person. So, I think what art therapy opens up is the possibility of having a personal experience, kind of doing your own expressive work, and then that kind of mediating the conversation.
Wow, it is so interesting. Could you please share with us some results or some cases that you've seen in clients?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be careful to, keep confidentiality. I won't be specific. But generally, I think what I have witnessed in the clients I've worked with is an increased sense of trust and intuition, a sense of like, oh, like I can really trust myself to ground and resource. Like I can turn to myself and my creative practice when I'm feeling anxious or unsure or I need to work something out. And they often leave with this feeling of having just a bit of a fuller tool belt. Before they might have had, a set of things that they would turn to. And then art is just, this one more thing that they can do kind of in their day or in their life to feel better or feel more empowered or, address a certain mental health concern.
I think one thing I've learned is really realizing art is not just painting, not just I'm so used to just seeing people paint, but when I'm not trained in painting or I don't know what to paint, then can't really express myself thinking using art. But what you said was you can use laundry basket or anything that you can think of, or recycling materials, and just make things out, like, which is really, really exciting and great to know.
Yeah, totally. There's no kind of boundaries on the types of materials. If a person, maybe had a bad experience in school of drawing or painting, we never have to do that. We can bring poetry into it. We can kind of cut out words from a book and rearrange them. We can bring in kind of ritual and mindfulness aspects. There's all sorts of things. We have such a kind of a limited idea of what art is, and that we have to have a certain kind of, quote unquote talent to engage in it. And actually, like, I really believe that creativity is so broad and literally every human being has access to it. And so I think, my big mission in working with clients is helping them open that door and kind of quiet that inner critic that says, oh, art's not for you. And, start to use creative tools to feel better.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly the workshop you're doing next weekend, isn't it? So tell us about the work with your inner critic.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in this idea of the inner critic, both because of my own experience, right? Like I have this inner critic that will sometimes chime in and tell me I'm lazy or a piece of art isn't worth posting or that I'm not good enough or, whatever it is. I think that's a really universal experience. And so I've been designing this workshop with a wonderful organization based out of San Francisco called Soul Doodles. And the idea is that we're going to get together, in community, have a kind of group discussion about kind of how the inner critic shows up, what it is, and then learn a couple of tools for working with it. I think something that's really important to remember, as we're identifying what this critical voice is that it's not coming from us. I might have these thoughts about, oh, I'm lazy, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not good enough. But what we know is true is that somewhere along the line, we learned to think that way, or someone taught us to speak to ourselves that way, right? Like if you've ever seen a kid start to make art, they're so uninhibited. Like they just go for it. And somewhere along the way, we learn not to. And perhaps it's because our parents spoke to us in a critical way. Perhaps it was the comparisons we were subjected to at school. Perhaps it's because we were only shown very Eurocentric styles of art. Perhaps it's other systems of oppression that we've experienced that we have in turn internalized, and it has become a voice that we hear in our own heads. And so what we can do with that is think about this as kind of an external character. Or so what we're going to be doing in the workshop is actually creating a creature or a character or some kind of drawing or symbol of this critic. So, maybe you decide your critic is named Karen and, or whatever, right? or Bill, or you give it a name, and maybe it has claws and big teeth, or whatever it is, but like really getting into this creative expression of like, who is this critic, and kind of taking it outside of our bodies, using the art materials to externalize it and begin to dialogue with it and start to change it, and use the art materials to transform a little bit of how that shows up in our lives. So the workshop's going to be an hour. It's on the 24th at 9 a.m. And you can find more information about that at Soul Doodles on Instagram.
Love it. And I will post that in the comment and for everyone to join in. But I'm really excited, and I'll look up the time to see if I can make it. I'm really excited to join the workshop. And I think I love what you've said about it's connecting with your inner child. It's letting your inner child come out and play and express themselves. And often when in our childhood, growing up in China, or, I always study really hard and never really get enough time to play, or I was really creative, but didn't really have the opportunity to get into art or to express myself in that way. So it's wonderful that art therapy gave me the opportunity to open up that space and to experiment and try different things using art and through art, and part of the healing process, which is, wow, it's amazing. Thank you.
I'm glad you used the word play too. That's such a huge part of it. As adults, how many opportunities do we have, over the course of a week to do something that just feels fun, relaxing, and playful? When people come into kind of my digital office space, sometimes we're doing kind of bigger trauma work and bigger grief work, but also sometimes we're doing art just because it feels good. And I think there's real therapeutic value in just, setting aside an hour and a half in your day to, play with materials, kind of feel maybe chalk pastels in your hands, do something creative, because it brings us joy, or it brings us a sense of ease or playfulness that connects to that inner child place in us.
Yeah, wow. I'm really excited, and certainly playing it's really fun. And I think that's what I've realized, that the process is fun. Fun is good. That really help our soul to express ourselves. So often, when I think of art, it's at school that you have to draw a certain way, do things a certain way, that it's not taking the play out of the equation. So thank you so much for showing us. And I certainly love your space, the red wall behind it, and your glasses, your earrings, on your social media, on your Instagram that you show. Like, that's very, very exciting. It's a fun space. So
I try to bring a sense of play into my life in kind of all facets. Yeah. Lots of play and color.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, Amelia, for sharing us in your journey being an artist as well as art therapist.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. Thank you for having me.
So for everyone watching, thank you so much for staying with us and listening to this conversation. I think it has so much value, and art therapy is a whole different space, and definitely worth experimenting and definitely worth getting into. So please reach out to Amelia if you want to know more about art therapy, and also check out the workshop happening next weekend. So looking forward to that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I would also just want to let you know that this show is called The Art of Health and Wellbeing, and the purpose and the goal is to connect the world of art, science, health, and healing, bring experts around the world to help you unlock the secret of longevity and vitality. So thank you so much, and we're looking forward to more conversations down the track. Bye.